Good morning if you're Central Time and West. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We are going live today talking about electrolytes and pregnancy and breastfeeding. So how electrolytes can affect all of those things. Just give it a minute here. We're going to let Victoria's going to pop on here with me. So as soon as she requests to join, we'll get into it. Hey guys. Good morning. Okay, here we go. Let's see. All right, we're connecting.
Hold on. Flip me around here. There we are. Good morning. It's still morning there, I guess.
4 minutes of morning.
Awesome. I'm happy to be live with you. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So I wanted to bring you on to talk about your experience with electrolytes you've had 2 different pregnancies and 2 very different experiences.
Right.
Sodium intake, and then eventually we're going to get to that great photo that it's gone like viral of the before and after breastfeeding.
Right.
That was the second pregnancy, so we'll kind of go along the timeline. So let's start with your first. So your first pregnancy, you were on just sort of a standard American diet.
Yeah, I was coming off of being vegan for a few years and got pregnant, and I had been basically so discouraged with my up and down blood sugar and horrific cravings when I was coming off of being vegan. I kind of threw my hands in the air and said, all right, whatever, I'm going to go back to the standard American diet. Went back to standard American diet. I was already at that point 30 pounds overweight, and I got pregnant. And when I got pregnant, had the very typical pregnancy, lots and lots of swelling, and you hear the same old. If you're craving it, then you should eat it because the baby obviously needs a loaded brownie and an entire pizza, which yes, I did do at one point. But no one questioned it at the time. It was just like, well, obviously you need calories, and I had really bad swelling problems, especially towards like month 6, month 7. Hands started swelling, feet just looked like giant shoe boxes, and obviously what you hear, and I know I'm not the only one that has heard this, but drink more water, and oh gosh, stay away from the salt, cut sodium, don't have any sodium. And I heard this from very well-meaning people, friends, people who I trusted. And I was only seeing my midwife once a month at that point. And then towards the end of the pregnancy, you kind of pick up a little bit more and see them a little more often. And at one point I was just so swollen and so puffy and so miserable. I mean, my joints just ached and so thirsty. I had insatiable thirst. I was chugging just insane amounts of water. I would frequently wake up in the middle of the night to consume an extra 30 ounces just to get myself through the evening, peeing like a racehorse, and just puffier and puffier. And when I finally saw my midwife at one point, she was like, oh my gosh, like, I think you've given yourself a fluid balance problem. I order you to go home and eat a very well-seasoned hamburger or steak or, very well-seasoned, plenty of salt. And it helped. The next morning I woke up and I'm like, oh my gosh, my hands look like my hands. They're not so insanely puffy anymore. So I fought through that over and over and over and got to had my little girl. And at that point, I was 100 pounds heavier than I am now as well. And I was struggling to nurse. And I was still drinking tons of water because I was so thirsty. And, everyone keeps telling you when you have a baby, drink tons and tons of water. Make sure you drink water. You can't feed a baby without water. That's not untrue. Like, you have to have water or you will die. But I didn't realize it was only part of the story. So I'm struggling to nurse, and like most moms in the United States, we have to go back to work pretty early. And so I went back and I was driving a sales route, and I frequently was on the road for long amounts of time, and I'm pumping and pumping. And, the pressure as a nursing mom, and if anybody's ever, on this feed has ever, struggled to nurse, a nursing mom will do anything to keep that milk supply up. And I mean, I saw a lactation consultant, and I had the teas, and I had the different supplements, and I had the lactation cookies, and I ate oatmeal, and I had all of these different supplements that I was taking, and it's just, nothing worked. And I gained more weight just eating tons and tons of these, oatmeals and things like that, and lactation muffins, and I was baking myself into. I tell people I didn't get more milk, I just got bigger, and was very frustrated. And as I've met many nursing moms who are frustrated, and you're doing the best you can. So if the one thing I do want to say to anybody that's watching is, this isn't about doing something perfectly or not perfectly, or any type of a judgment about whether you nurse or you don't nurse, because there's so much pressure already. But you'll just do anything to feed your baby, and you want to be successful and do the best you can. So this is just giving another piece of the puzzle that could be missing for a mother. So when I was nursing and struggling to nurse, I was continually drinking all this water. And at one point I had an incident where I passed out, and it turns out I had drank so much water, I dropped my electrolytes so low that I passed out, and my coworkers could not rouse me for about 10 minutes. And I didn't realize how long I was out. And when the paramedics came, I thought I must have really low blood sugar or something. And so they checked my blood sugar, 87. It was just fine. The paramedics gave me more water, which I had been drinking all day. These big, massive jugs that the hospital gives you, just chugging that. Going, if I drink this, maybe I'll get an extra ounce pumped out today. And so they gave me more water, and almost immediately upon drinking that bottle of water, I began to it felt like slide backwards. My vision became all distorted. I had the tunnel hearing, tunnel sounds, ringing in the ears, and I could hear the paramedic. And I thought I was responding to the paramedic, but I heard him say, "We've got to take her to the hospital. She's not making any sense. She's speaking gibberish." So I was just coming in and out, and they did all these tests, said, "You're fine," but they wouldn't let me eat, and they wouldn't let me drink. And I finally had somebody bring me a nice salty plate of barbecue, and it was like I was a new woman. So I began to piece together these little pieces, these little parts of the puzzle about electrolytes, and basically realized that what we tell people is that hydration is H2O, it's water. And that's not the entire picture. So how do we miss the boat with a nursing mother and electrolytes? I don't know if you want to ask more questions from here. Or
Yeah, no, that's all fascinating, because that's the same thing. I feel like we always just hear for pregnant moms, it's like, oh, drink plenty of water, eat lots of carbs, and you'll make milk. But
right.
that's
Yeah,
not the whole, like you were saying. Yeah.
it's not the whole picture.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you had your fainting spell, had barbecue, which had plenty of salt in it, came
Oh
back
yeah,
to yeah.
it did. It definitely came back to life.
Yeah. Um, and then after that, so you started to, when did you start your transition to a more keto-based diet?
So in 2017, so I was still attempting to nurse. In 2017, I started a ketogenic diet, and I mostly did it because I was like, well, you know what? I've been vegan. I've been standard American diet. I've never done anything with macros, I guess. So let's give this a try. So I started eating a more ketogenic diet, and I found the guys, Luis and Tyler at Keto Gains, and found the Keto Gains mom page, or Keto Gains baby. And they were just like electrolytes, electrolytes, electrolytes. And so I started doing some more research into that and realized I was like, okay, that seems to be kind of the missing piece. And I started digging into the research, and I realized I was drinking too much water, and I got pregnant again. Thank you, keto, aka the fertility diet. It's nicknamed. But my kids,
Before, right?
what?
You had struggled to get pregnant with your first?
Yeah, I struggled to get pregnant with my first. I know it's not nearly as long as some people have struggled, but yeah, I struggled. But with my second pregnancy, when I got pregnant, I was like, you know what? I feel amazing. I'm going to keep up this keto thing. And I was eating a nutrient-dense Whole Foods diet. So I was eating, steak and eggs and seafood and, iodine-rich foods rich in B vitamins, leafy greens, foods that are very healthy for you, and bioavailable areas of food. So my second pregnancy was like night and day. The second pregnancy, I didn't have any swelling, and I was keeping my sodium levels up high. And it's important for people to understand the mechanism of action that a low carb or ketogenic diet has on your fluid balance. So when you begin a low carb or ketogenic diet, and you cut down your carbohydrates, you also end up losing water. And there's the RAS system, that renin pathway, the aldosterone, and glucose and insulin influences that. So when I was pregnant with my second and eating this low carb diet, I didn't retain nearly the amount of water that I did with my first. But when you lose a lot of water, you also lose electrolytes. So with my second, I had already learned the importance of keeping my electrolytes up. And with my second, I didn't have the water retention. I kept the electrolytes going, up. And I think some of the science says around 5,000 to 7,000 milligrams for somebody who's on a low carb or ketogenic diet, maybe carnivore diet. But so I was keeping at minimum those thresholds, and had an amazing pregnancy, just night and day. And I'm sure being more nourished with real whole foods is much better. But the sodium component made such a huge difference. If my sodium began to dip and my thirst mechanism would come back, I would start to get really thirsty. And if I only replaced with water, I'd start to get puffy again. And when you learn about fluid balance and the hormones and enzymes that control that, it all comes together. It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So that was my second thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You're doing 5,000 to 7,000 milligrams of sodium per day is kind of where you're keeping it.
That's where I am as a non-nursing, low carb, ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
As a nurse, when I was pregnant, the thought is your fluid amount, total fluid amount and blood volume in your body is going to go up. So the needs are more, not less. And there's some really good research out there about that. And I think Lily Nichols, RD, she wrote this awesome book, Real Food for Pregnancy, that she talks about that in there. And but sodium is a really key component to keeping your fluid balance proper in your body. And when we tell women, drink tons and tons of water, avoid sodium, which we've kind of heard in media, it's just pervasive. We put women in this struggle with drinking tons of water and then dropping their electrolytes low, and their fluid balance gets messed up. And then, not to mention, you can get all of these other nagging symptoms and headaches and ringing in the ears and muscle cramps and heart palpitations and passing out, or positional issues with, fainting. And a lot of these symptoms look like low blood sugar. And so a lot of women will just take that to eat more. And, it could be a combination of those things, but the recommendation that doesn't focus also on the electrolytes component is it's really only telling half the story, and it can cause some real problems.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because the typical recommended amount by like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, so the overarching body for dietitians, recommends for Americans just 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day.
Right.
And so
right.
5,000 to 7,000, like that's significantly higher than what we're told.
Right. So. And that's for somebody who's also on the standard American diet, so their kidneys are going to retain fluid a little bit differently. But there was a meta-analysis back in 1998 that covered 30 years of sodium, heart disease, and covered all of this. And their conclusion was there is not enough evidence to restrict sodium for the entire population. It's just a small percentage. And when you drink exorbitant amounts of water, or you sweat, or you drink dark sodas, or tons of coffee, or you take certain medications, or you eat really fresh food diet, like a paleo diet or a ketogenic diet or a Whole Foods diet, a low carb diet, you're not getting processed foods, you're not getting tons of sodium. And so if you have someone who follows that type of a diet, which I bet most of your followers are, a very Whole Foods fresh diet, you're not getting these, thousands and thousands of milligrams of sodium. And you have to have sodium. You have to have magnesium. You have to have potassium. Those are your electrolytes. And they basically help cell signaling and all these different processes and action potentials and in your body. And I think just all the background noise that's anti-sodium and well-meaning, but not necessarily science-driven advice to drink large amounts of water have given some kind of mixed message to women, and for me, caused tons of problems. And I don't blame any one person or anything like that, but so
yeah. Difference in your ability to feed your baby or not. If it comes down to that,
right.
like that's huge. That's a really big freaking deal to be able to breastfeed right. for more than 6 months versus feeding them formula. So
right.
And when you go back to the beginning of the sodium story, I feel like a broken record when I talk about nutrition sometimes, because it all comes down to there was some faulty science way back in the day that somehow got written in stone and has been perpetuated for the last 50 or so years. It happened with fat diets. It's happened with sodium. So many things. So I think
red meat. It's just
yeah, it's so important for people to realize, like, we are not being told the whole story if you just go by, governmental guidelines, essentially. Okay.
So I see a question on here.
Yeah. So for people who
go ahead, you do it.
Okay, I'll read it. For people who are eating a SAD diet, do they need to drink more water than just to thirst? That's a good question.
So I'll tell you my thoughts on that. So if you're eating the standard American diet and it's we're talking whole grains, veggies, some lean protein, drink water to thirst would be my recommendation. And drinking water instead of sodas and coffees and teas and sugary beverages, drink water. I don't think that the recommendations that we see on like Pinterest and Facebook and just all over the place that says drink half your body weight in ounces of water, or the trend of these giant hydro flasks that are huge. And I see people making these goals of drinking like 3 or 4 of those a day. And it's like you win a prize or something for drinking this much water. You're just going to pee a lot. And then you're going to drop your electrolytes. And when you drink that much water, whether you are getting some sodium in your diet or not, when you drink that much water, your kidneys, those little cells in your kidneys will tell your body that there's not enough sodium, and it can actually signal your hypothalamus to drink more water. So then you get thirstier. And it becomes this horrific cycle of being super thirsty and drinking more water and drinking more water and drinking more water until, hey, you've passed out or you start getting these nagging symptoms. So my best advice is, one, don't follow the standard American diet. But number 2 is understand that water is also in your food. Water's in vegetables. Water's in meat. So if you follow your thirst, that is your body's mechanism to tell you to drink water. But understand that fluid retention in the body is very much based on carbohydrate intake. And I don't remember if it was Dr. Ted Naiman, I believe, that mentioned he had a patient that came to him in like end stage, he had congestive heart failure, and he put him on like a very low carb ketogenic diet. And I think within 2 weeks, he'd lost like 35 pounds of fluid, of water. And that just makes everything work harder in your body. So fluid balance is multiple things, but if you drop your electrolytes very low and you are trying to nurse, you're not going to be able to maintain a proper fluid balance in your body to be able to nurse. All right.
Definitely. Very cool. I agree with all of those sentiments. Okay. So I want to get to the story of the photo. So we'll get to that, and then we'll answer this question about the heavy period also. I promise we'll get to that question.
Okay.
Let's talk about that photo. So this was your second pregnancy.
Yes.
You're already following a low-carb ketogenic diet. You're keeping your electrolytes up. So what's the story with that photo?
So this photo, man, controversy. People find controversy in like all kinds of corners of the internet. I've already been accused of like milk shaming moms because I made so much milk the next day. Like, it's not about that. Not about that at all. So I drove a sales route and drove this route for sometimes 10, 12 hours at a time. So I was pumping on the road, and I would routinely kind of hook up to my, little milk system there in the car and put, my little cover on me and drive to my next place. And I always carried, because I was keeping my electrolytes up, I always carried a little bottle of Soleil water, which we can talk about. and it's a sodium concentrate. And that's how I would get my electrolytes in, particularly sodium, because sodium is affected so much by fluid intake and activity and things like that. So I would always carry that with me. And on this particular day, I forgot it. And so at my 1 p.m. feeding, I believe it was, I hook up, I drive I drive to my next place, which was about 20, 25 minutes away. And I pull back my cover and there's like less than an ounce in each. And I like gasped. I was like, oh my God, like this is not good. And I knew that day I hadn't had any of my electrolytes at all. It was that drastic. And so I got home that night and I just had a very good regimen of, okay, all right, I'm going to have this many milligrams of sodium, on the hour. Every couple of hours, I would, drink one of my electrolyte beverages that has a good bit of sodium in it. And by the next day, that following 24 hours later, that pump was almost like 10 ounces. And granted, that's hot. That's a lot to pump. But what that shows is not, hey, if you ingest 8,000 milligrams of sodium, you're going to pump 10 ounces. That's not what that photo is showing. That photo is showing I was low and that's all I could pump. And when I was able to bring my levels back up, it came up, but then it does, level back out as long as I maintain those electrolytes. So for a mother, if you're on here and you're struggling to breastfeed, if you are low in electrolytes, then yes, extra sodium in your diet could help you. If you are not low in electrolytes and you don't have any issues with that, then adding extra sodium might do nothing for you. So this isn't like a false sense of, this isn't a false recommendation. It's just basically explaining that I could replicate that the next week. The next week, if I skipped an entire day of electrolytes, the same thing happened. So it wasn't that just putting extra, the more electrolytes you drink, the more milk you're going to make, just like with water. It's not like if you just drink more water, you're going to make more milk. There is a balance to it. But if you are somebody who eats fresh foods, who doesn't intake a lot of sodium, if you are someone who has been drinking a ton of water, if you're a mother who is an athlete and is nursing and you notice that when you're working out, your milk supply drops, all of those things are impacting fluid balance. So drink your water to thirst. That's one of the best recommendations is drink to thirst. Eat fresh fruits and vegetables and you will have water. You'll be hydrated. Salt your food to taste. If you are on a ketogenic or a low carb diet, you will need more sodium because of the diuretic effect of a ketogenic diet on the kidneys. You will drop fluid faster. And that's for anybody on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet where you don't have that high circulating insulin. So if you have been sick or vomiting, your electrolytes could be low. So that's the story of the photo.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's important to note too that women who think that they might be taking in enough sodium or enough electrolytes based on the 2,300 milligram per day recommendation, it's also important to note that you might think you have enough, but actually you can supplement with much, much more. And that
Right. Yeah. And for me, the difference was if I struggled with something, for me, the answer was always I needed more electrolytes, not less. And believe me, like it was something that I had to work on to keep up those levels. And once I got my routine down, it wasn't difficult. And my needs did change when I stopped nursing. But then my needs change during the week. If I go for a run and it's really hot, I have no problem running on no carbs at all. Like I have some of my best 5K times on no carbs, but I cannot run with low electrolytes. I will just poop out. It's terrible. But I think there's a study that show when you're not avoiding salt, but you're just eating to taste and you're just ingesting to your own comfort level, that most adults naturally ingest between 3,000 and 4,000. Mm-hmm. So if you're eating fresh foods, don't avoid salt, and don't drink exorbitant amounts of water. There's no scientific evidence, or that's not based on any scientific evidence that you need to drink half your body weight in ounces of water, or you need to fill your giant 64 Hydro Flask 4 or 5 times a day and chug that. You can have some serious issues when you do that. So all my migraines stopped when I stopped doing that. They all went away. I get like one a year, and it's usually, I didn't get any electrolytes in.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people attribute headaches too to dehydration when it could be just electrolytes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me answer the question we had real quick. And it was asking about drinking a lot of water, if that has anything to do with heavy periods. And in my experience, I have found that those two things are not necessarily related. Really heavy periods have a lot more to do with hormonal balance, which I talk about a lot on my page. So the person who asked that question, go look through some of my posts. But there's a lot of other things you can do to kind of balance your hormones that can help with heavier periods. I'm just not sure that there's so much a connection with like heavy.
Yeah. There might be, I don't know about heavy, but if you are not hydrated, and remember when I say hydration, I don't mean pure water. I mean water and electrolytes. And that's going to look different. I keep harping on that. It's going to look different for every person depending on diet, activity level, where you live, heat. But fluid balance, blood volume, does play a role with hydration. I don't know the degree that it does, so I can't speak to that. I'm definitely not a doctor, not an expert. So,
yeah. Cool. Well, this next question that someone just typed in goes right along with what I was about to ask you anyway. So, how do you get your electrolytes in? So, you mentioned Soleil water. So, tell us what that is.
So, if you are coming from a like a paleo but still higher carb diet, your needs will be different than somebody who's on a low carb ketogenic diet. For somebody who's on a low carb ketogenic carnivore diet, you will need significantly more because of the diuretic nature of low carb. So for me, I needed much more than just salting my food. For somebody who is on a paleo diet or standard American diet, if you're not drinking tons of water, then it may be as simple as just salting all of your food. When you make vegetables, salt your food, add a little into your coffee. For somebody who is on a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, usually keeping your carbohydrates below, I think like 25 net carbs, you will need more, between 5,000 and 7,000 milligrams. If you are pregnant, it could be, and you're still following a low carb ketogenic diet, then you would need more because of the extra fluid volume and depending on how much water you're drinking. So the way that I got in those higher amounts for my case was Soleil water. And Soleil water is basically it's a sodium concentrate. It's not just salt water. You're ensuring that the water has been saturated with sodium. And the way you do that is get yourself a glass mason jar, and throw like half a cup of Redmond's real salt, some sea salt into the jar and fill it with water. I use reverse osmosis water because the water here in this area is crap. And leave it overnight. When you leave it overnight, the sodium in the salt, because remember, salt does not equal so 5,000 milligrams of salt is not the same thing, or is not the same thing as 5,000 milligrams of sodium. So the sodium in the salts will saturate the water. So the next morning, just do it before you go to bed. The next morning when you come back, that water, that liquid, is going to be saturated to the point where the measurement is 1 tablespoon will equal 1,400 milligrams, give or take, 1,400 milligrams of sodium. So I knew I needed between, X milligrams and X milligrams of sodium, depending on those variables. So you have to take into consideration your variables for your needs, your diet, your activity level, how much you sweat, were you working out, are you pregnant, are you nursing, how much water you're drinking. Those are all things that you want to really consider. So I would make Soleil water. The other part of that is potassium. So potassium and magnesium are also other electrolytes that if you flush your electrolytes by drinking too much water, you will mess with those levels as well. I take a magnesium pill. For me, 500 milligrams every day does the trick. Potassium, I can get those from leafy greens, the drippings from roasts and bone broth and things like that. I get it from there. So you don't need to just try to dump everything into one glass jar and just chug it all. You can just make sure you get those levels and also go with how you feel. You go with how you feel. If you're, having issues with falling asleep, your magnesium might be too low. If you're at cramping, you could need some sodium. If you're having heart palpitations, you might have messed with your potassium. So I also use Morton's light salts, which is like half potassium chloride, half sodium, and put that on my food, a little bit of that. But if you raise your sodium, you want to raise your potassium as well. They kind of work in a ratio for your cellular fluid balance. So I make Soleil water and I work from that jar. I will have my water bottle that I work throughout the day, and I will measure a tablespoon of Soleil water, the sodium concentrate, into the water bottle. And depending on my day that day, I will add like 1/4 of a teaspoon of Morton's light salt, which I think is like 500 milligrams of potassium, into the water. Throw whatever zero sugar, flavoring you like. I think Crystal Light has like a Crystal Light Pure or like a Truvia lemonade. Put that in there. I add a tablespoon of Soleil water into my coffee. Cuts any bitterness out of the coffee, and it's really good. But that's what I do. I don't necessarily use any one product. When I was nursing, there wasn't really anything out there that could touch the amounts that were needed. I think now Element exists from Rob Wolf and Tyler and Louise from Keto Gains. They made that together. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of success with that because for the money, it's got enough sodium and potassium in it. But some of these other ones that you'll find on the shelf at Whole Foods, they just don't really have enough for somebody on a low carb ketogenic diet. Maybe for somebody following a like a paleo diet that still is higher carb, you're not needing those tons of milligrams of sodium. You just maybe need an extra 1,000 or something like that. That might work, but it wasn't enough for me. And if I may, do not waste your money on electrolyte water. That is the biggest scam ever. If you see something that's touting electrolytes and it doesn't have sodium, magnesium, or potassium in it, don't waste your money. Those are your electrolytes. Calcium as well, but calcium doesn't fluctuate as much as the sodium does. So that's what I will say about that.
It's not a source of electrolytes.
What was that?
As a Gatorade is not a good source of electrolytes.
No, terrible source of electrolytes. What a robbery.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that's great. I have never actually tried the Soleil water, but what I do is every morning, so every night before I go to bed, I'll put half a teaspoon of red mint salt in like 16 ounces of water, and I just chug
Hmm.
that in the morning. And then
Nice.
I follow like mostly a carnivore diet, and so then I just salt everything to taste essentially, and
Mhm.
thirst. So
Yeah.
that works.
And drinking the thirst, like it's funny when I go back and I look at like my 5K race times in insane heat. I last year I had my best 5K of the year in what felt like 1,000% humidity, so hot, best time, but I had really regimented my electrolytes up until that race. And I didn't need to drink anything during the race, nothing. I just was ready to go and I felt amazing. And then 2 weeks later, ran a race very similar to that. Um, that distance. Yeah, it was another 5K, and it was overcast. It was probably 15 degrees cooler, and I crapped out. And I hadn't had but 1,000 milligrams of sodium approximately that day. And if you're a low carb keto, that can be the difference between like feeling amazing and posting some best times, having a great workout, and not doing very well.
Yeah.
Or pumping 10 ounces or pumping 1 ounce.
Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to clarify too. So 5 to 7,000 milligrams. I can't remember the exact calculation, but it's something like between like 2 and 4 teaspoons so of salt. So it's not
Actually,
even.
I wrote it down right here. So in granulated salts, 1 teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And so you basically just have to do some math and say, if I want to find this comfortable range, then this is how much I need to get in throughout the day. I use Soleil water. Some people will literally get their scale out, put salt on it, and go, this is how much, this many grams is what I need to get in throughout the day, whether I put it on my food or I put it in water and chug it, whatever works. I will say that I recommend having a strategy for it throughout the day. Do not try to just get 7,000 milligrams of sodium in all at once, or you could really be looking at a disaster pants issue where, you get some seriously loose stools and you don't want to trust yourself around that. So work up to those levels. If you're somebody who has been on a ketogenic, low carb diet and has been struggling with feeling tired or sluggish or fatigue, you're getting muscle cramps or some of those keto flu, that's just electrolyte imbalance, then I would make up some Soleil water and aim for those targets, 5,000 to 7,000. And that's going to depend on your body size too. Smaller people may not need as much. Smaller people that work outside in the heat and drink tons of water might need more than a big person who doesn't do that. But when it comes to having a plan, don't just try to do a ton of that, because you really could poop your pants and it would just be like Victoria said, but you need this much. No. But a good plan that I've had some clients do is make up your Soleil water, get your Morton's light salt, or have a plan to eat those leafy greens, avocados for potassium. But with sodium, do 1 tablespoon in some water of Soleil water, tablespoon into there, and drink that in the morning, and then do 1 in the evening. And then the next day, increase it a little bit. Do 3 tablespoons over the course of the day. The next day, do 3 tablespoons. The next day, do 4 tablespoons. And then when you get to the point where you're like, I feel good, stop, maintain, and just keep that up. And if at any point you dip down again and you haven't had any, don't try to just go right back to, 6 tablespoons or 7 tablespoons of Soleil water. You'll once again have some loose stools issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the story photo,
Yes.
or the story. So that
Yep.
night when you went home and had 8,000 milligrams, did you kind of space that out through the evening, or did you just kind of?
Yep. It was over the course of like the next 24 hours.
Okay.
So 2 tablespoons, as soon as I could. As soon as I could get me some more sodium. I even think I like stopped at like a gas station or something, or they've got a little cafe. Salt was, if you don't have anything around you, salt. Just get some salt. Pickle juice, olive juice. There's sodium in those things. Just don't avoid salt and drink tons of water. So.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'm going to just ask what Soleil water is. We went over the recipe a little earlier, so this will be on my IGTV. So you can tune in to the IGTV and get that, and I'll put it in the comments too. I can write that down in there or in the description. Cool.
I will say, if I may, when you make Soleil water, which is the sodium concentrate, the next morning when you come back, you want there to be crystals on the bottom still, because that means the water has fully absorbed as much of the sodium as possible. What you don't want to do is when you go to use it and you measure out a tablespoon, don't stir it up. It'll just be like chugging ocean water. Just scoop off the top and leave those crystals and minerals at the bottom to not be disturbed, or else it's really kind of yeah.
Good call.
Yeah, but I sometimes strain it off into another bottle, and I have little bottles of Soleil water stashed just for, whenever I need it. There's some in my glove compartment. I swear it looks like I have a drinking problem, like adding vodka to my, nope, it's just sodium water.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Well, that's all the questions I had for you. Thanks for chatting with me today. I think this would be really good information, like we were saying. It's good information for pregnant mamas, breastfeeding moms to know. It's not necessarily a cure-all for everything, but it's just good information to have that 2,300 milligrams of sodium might not be enough, especially if you are breastfeeding, essentially.
Right. And if you're thinking about being pregnant or you're pregnant right now, or you're nursing, this book, Real Food for Pregnancy by Lily Nichols, it talks about a lot of this, and she cites all of her sources, all of the research. The Salt Fix, really good information. Head over to PubMed, find out that, sodium is an essential mineral for life, and without it, you can't perform a host of functions and will generally feel like poop. And then when you combine that with drinking exorbitant amounts of water, you could head into some really dangerous territory. And I did have this discussion with one of my anatomy and physiology instructors about the role that the internet plays on what people ingest. And she agreed that these things on Pinterest or on Facebook will they influence what people do, and people are drinking insane amounts of water because of some unverified, not science-based recommendations for fluid intake. So obviously, if you haven't drank a drop of water all day long and all you've had is energy drinks and coffee, and you eat a ton of processed food, okay, these recommendations are different. Please go drink some water.
Yeah.
but knowing the audience here, probably not those people.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I love both of those books as well. I highly recommend both of those. Those are awesome.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I really appreciate being able to talk with everybody and answer a few questions. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tag you. I'm going to post this to my IGTV and I'll tag you on it so if people want to reach out to you and they can just find you right there.
Absolutely. Yay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Brittany. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
So, there we go. Okay, cool. thank you so much, guys, for hanging out with me. Again, this will be posted to my IGTV. So if you found it valuable, you can share it with any friends, females that you know who might benefit from this information. If you are wanting to experiment with a low-carb diet or more of a carnivore, meat-based diet, I have a free challenge going on. It starts July 20th, so it's a free 5-day carnivore diet challenge where I will be going live inside of a Facebook group every single day, talking about all of the how-tos, how to get started on carnivore, how to stay successful with it. We have a whole day talking about salt and electrolytes and how important those are. So just go to the link in my bio if you want to get signed up for that challenge. You got to sign up for it in order to be part of that Facebook group. And any questions or at all, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks, guys.